It's kind of surreal that in 2025, we're finally getting MACROSS games released in North America. Thanks to whatever behind the scenes deals made it happen, everything from MACROSS Plus to MACROSS Frontier landed on Hulu, giving people a real chance to experience the series firsthand. Or at least that should have been the case, if anyone actually seemed to notice. Despite this technically being a big moment for anime fans, especially those into Mecha, Hulu didn't seem to put any effort to let people know these series were available. No promotion, no marketing push, nothing. They sort of just sat there in the catalog for months before this video, even though there was plenty of demand online. Honestly, I wouldn't have even known they were there myself if not for a single article on Game Rant, of all places. But that's besides the point. What matters is that MACROSS has a presence now, and we actually got Shooting Insight thanks to Bushiroad Games developing it and Red Art bringing it to North America. I can't overstate my appreciation for that, and for them providing me with a key. Does that technically make this video sponsored? Well, if receiving a $39.99 game key counts, then sure. It is what it is, and I'm going to be 100% honest about this release either way. I'd also like to make it perfectly clear that I've received no money at all. But anyhow, having MACROSS games available in the West doesn't automatically mean they're great. It just means we finally get them. Shooting Insight's 5 available campaigns are loosely stitched together by a Super Robot Wars-esque visual novel narrative, just without the enormous runtime. The premise revolves around a dimensional fold that throws various heroes and villains from across the MACROSS timeline into the same universe. Naturally, they tend to start crossing paths, trying to make sense of the situation and unravel the game's fairly thin plot. One of the game's big selling points is the inclusion of the franchise's famous idols, whose music plays during certain gameplay segments. It's a cool concept in theory, but will I be able to show much of it? Absolutely not. I've had my fair share of run-ins with Japanese copyright law, and since fair use isn't a thing in Japan, I already know better than to test those waters. Beyond the music integration, the idols also weave into each character's storyline in some capacity, though I can't say the connections feel particularly meaningful. The game claims that everything is interwoven, but in practice, not really. Without getting into spoilers, because this game is still way too new for that, each pilot essentially plays their own version of the same core story. They might cross paths with one another or run into idols from different MACROSS series, but when it comes to major encounters, boss fights, villains, big plot moments, each character experiences them independently. It gives the illusion of a larger interconnected narrative, but in reality, it's more like 5 slightly different takes on the same sequence of events. I'd be a little more critical of this if it even really mattered. You can toggle the story cutscenes off completely if you just want to hop into the game and play it like any other shoot 'em up out there. So none of this is actually thrust onto the player at any point. When it comes to discussing the gameplay itself, this one was a tough game to tackle. Not in terms of explanation, but in sheer difficulty. MACROSS Shooting Insight is brutal. I gave myself extra time to get comfortable with the controls, to really try and get a handle on things, because I do enjoy MACROSS, and I wanted to give this game a fair shot. But no matter how much effort I put in, it felt like I was just slamming my head against a wall. This is coming from someone who enjoys shoot 'em ups like Sylphie, Gradius, and my all-time favorite series of the genre, R-Type. And yet, MACROSS Shooting Insight makes all of those look like child's play at times, demanding near-perfect execution right from the jump. Now, I suppose there are easy and very easy difficulty modes, as well as optional handicaps that allow for things like regenerating health. However, these adjustments feel half-baked at best. The so-called easy and very easy modes only seem to nerf the bosses, leaving the rest of the stages just as punishing as before. So after sweating through a level, you're suddenly met with an embarrassingly weak boss encounter that crumples in seconds, completely undercutting any sense of progression. It's not just unsatisfying, it's just jarring. So I didn't opt to play on anything but normal. And yes, I'll admit that I did a few runs with some in-game assistance. You're going to see that in this footage. The game provides boost and invoke modes, which allow for different levels of automatic health recovery. It makes the game only a bit easier, but you'll be dying like mad if you aren't careful anyhow. If you enable one of these, your scores won't be uploaded to the game's arbitrary leaderboard system, which honestly, whatever. Personally, I couldn't care less about leaderboards in most cases. But what baffles me is that the game already separates scores into multiple categories for different modes. So why not just have dedicated leaderboards for those using Boost or Invoke? It's not like the system is incapable of tracking different conditions, since my scores in Ace Battle get uploaded even when I lose. But I suppose that's just how it is, no big deal. Well, kind of, but I'll get to that in a moment. Each of the 5 available fighters you choose have a different standard firing mode. They don't differ much in terms of speed, just slight variations. The real distinction comes from their missile loadout and lock-on time, and that's about it, outside of their unique perspectives on the story. But what really makes this game a challenge, if you're not relying on Boost or Invoke, is the complete lack of health pickups. The only way to regain health is through your score, which determines the small recovery boost you receive at the end of each mission. This is where score sort of does matter, because in this game, score directly affects survival. The higher your score, the bigger your health recovery. But here's the problem. If you're good enough to rack up a high score, you probably don't need the extra health in the first place. Meanwhile, if you're struggling, like I commonly did, you're going to be scraping by with whatever scraps of recovery the game begrudgingly tosses your way. And since your health carries over between missions, this means that if you barely survived a boss fight, you're limping into the next stage with whatever pitiful sliver of HP you were left with, plus the minor recovery your score granted. It creates a frustrating imbalance where the players who actually need the help the most are the ones least likely to get it. So if you're bad at this game, like I am, well, good luck, because MACROSS Shooting Insight isn't going to make it any easier. While Valkyries do transform in this game, you don't have control over when or how they do it. Instead, transformations are predetermined by the developers, locked into specific sections of gameplay rather than freely accessible. Sometimes it's tied to perspective. Jet mode is primarily used for the shoot 'em up stages, where you're zipping around in classic MACROSS-style dogfights. Other times you'll find yourself in bipedal form for side-scrolling segments, but then without much warning, the same bipedal mode gets used in twin-stick shooting sequences, and eventually a full third-person viewpoint reminiscent of something like Omega Boost on the PS1. It's a neat idea, and in concept, it should add variety to the gameplay, but in practice, it feels restrictive. There is potential in the twin-stick and third-person sections, enough that they could have been standout features, but they're extremely underutilized. No matter which campaign you play, these segments rarely evolve beyond doing the same thing over and over, which makes them feel more like scripted set pieces than actual gameplay mechanics. Once you complete a campaign, the game starts handing out its bevy of unlockables, and to be fair, there's a lot to unlock here. During missions, you'll find mementos from the MACROSS series floating around in crates, functioning as the game's collectibles. How much value these have is entirely dependent on how much you care about callbacks. Personally, I have a habit of grabbing every item I come across, even when they don't actually add much to the gameplay. So these floating crates became a bit of a burden for me. I had to go after them, even when it meant putting myself in danger and losing a ton of health in the process. Then there's Ace Mode, where taking down enemy aces unlocks MACROSS memories. These bosses are, without a doubt, the hardest encounters in the game, and if you want to get through them, you'll need to practice a lot. There's no difficulty selection here, and the Invoke or Boost modes that help in the main campaign completely disabled. It's all about raw skill, which is probably why I never even came close to unlocking any of these MACROSS memories or even seeing what they were. My best guess is that they were just scenes from the show itself, which, if true, means that I'd get a content ID hit anyway. So, in a way, my complete inability to conquer this game probably saved me from that headache. Visually, MACROSS Shooting Insight isn't always easy on the eyes. I played the game docked for the best possible experience as I was on the Switch, but I initially tried it on the Switch Lite, and yeah, that was a mistake. This game is simply too busy to enjoy on a smaller screen. My handheld experience eventually shifted to the OLED model, which at least provided more clarity and screen real estate to work with. That, and it saved my eyes from some of the absolute sensory overload this game throws at you. And that brings me to one of the game's biggest issues. The game's color choices actively make it harder to play. There are sections where meteors streak across the background while black-colored enemy fighters shoot green projectiles, and it's a mess to process. Everything blends together in the worst way, making it almost impossible to track threats. Then, just when you think you've adjusted, an idle activation kicks in. something you have zero control over, and suddenly the screen is covered with pink borders and sparkles. Sometimes this even obscures boss fights, making them even more frustrating than they need to be. To be fair, not every stage suffers from this visual overload. Some are actually well designed, especially the ones with massive battleships in the background, or, on very rare occasions, the few levels that don't take place in space. Or, to be more specific, the only level that doesn't take place in space. And I really wish there was more of those, because the very late game planet stage, easily the best looking part of the entire experience. Not only does it spare your retinas from being liquefied, but it's also one of the most vibrant and visually striking environments in Shooting Insight. Now, about the music, you're gonna have to give me a pass here. It's all copyrighted to hell and back, so I can't exactly show much of it. The soundtrack consists of songs pulled directly from the anime, inserted into specific moments during gameplay. They aren't tied to score thresholds or player actions, they just pop up at scripted points. Sometimes you'll hear a full track, other times only a snippet. But they are all carefully selected fan favorites, so if you're personally someone who loves Macross, you might see this as a major selling point. Personally, I found it oddly amusing to be blasting enemies in space only for an idol to start singing out of nowhere, giving me some sort of boost. If these songs were implemented as actual power-ups rather than just scripted events, I think I would have appreciated their inclusion just a little bit more. So you've heard my 2 cents on MACROSS Shooting Insight. I know there are a lot of fans of the series out there. I'm genuinely curious if you are, or if you're not, where you stand on the fence with this one, yay or nay. Let me know in the comments below, like the video, and if you haven't subscribed, this is me begging you to do it. I've been Kei, and I will see you in the next video, hopefully sooner than later.